So I'm going to talk about a specific walk that I'm showing here. It's called Seed Shall Set Us Free. But before going to the walk, as Shradul talked about changes and transformation, I think so many things also have changed here. I remember when we first came here, we stayed in a hotel called Third World Guest House. And I didn't know if it was planned or they changed the title for us. But over the years, every time I come, the building is there, but the name always changes. And the name gets fancier. And this time I see that there are many fancy shop and signage downstairs. But when I stayed in that hotel, I remember I used to wake up 6 in the morning, and the school kids wearing dresses started dating like 6:30 in the morning. And I was so shocked how early you can start dating. But that's Kathmandu. It sleeps early, wakes up early. But within those times, so many things have changes. And in last 2 years, so many of us has lost our parents, and that has a significant effect in my life. And surprisingly, I did a portfolio review yesterday, and 3 of the students I met, 2 of them has lost someone very close to them. And but even within these losses, I think one thing really grown up in this city is this festival, these people, and their love and warmth. And I'm so happy and proud to be here. And thanks to Nayantara and the whole team for inviting me. So I will start. So in 2014, 21st March, I went to a Manipuri village with a group of artist friends on the border of Sylhet, the other side of Meghalaya in India. And the idea of the project was to walk in no man's land. And of course, in the border of India and Bangladesh, the no man's land is a specific place because you can be shot anytime. We were curious. And it was organized by an artist collective called Britto Art Trust and the Shelter Promotional Council in India. And that part of Sylhet, in most of the places, people are extracting stones from the riverbed and hills for various construction works. And even after the verdict of the court, the businessmen are using machines and including excavators. And when I went there, it was a Friday, which is a weekly holiday in Bangladesh. And there were no workers, no trucks, no machines. But we can see signs, pathways. And it was very difficult to understand the landscape of the place because of some kind of industrial intervention. And I was very, very interested in that sort of landscapes because, the construction of South Asia is also very political. How we define where is India, where is Bangladesh, where is Myanmar. And who made these borders and why we have to accept this. And I think Nepal in one of the few places in South Asia where we can come, and not only us, I think Pakistanis, Sri Lankans, Indians without visas. And that's why it's such a beautiful place to meet people from this region. But when I started walking there, I started talking with the people who was walking there. And most of them were scared. They thought I'm a journalist. And my photograph might cause them trouble because it's illegal to cut hills in Bangladesh. But after talking with them, I realized they were mostly farmers. And they only come to work in this sort of industrial places when there is not enough work in the villages in agricultural field. So slowly I started researching, and I was trying to understand the politics of food in relationship with Bangladesh and international politics. And a few years back, I started visiting this research center called Noya Krishi Andolon, which was founded in 1988 by a writer, researcher, activist Farhat Mazhar and Farida Akhtar. And Noya Krishi's immediate goal is to resist economic and technological processes that is turning the earth into barren fields and industrial deserts. And I quote them, for thousands of years, the farmers of Bangladesh selected, collected, cultivated, and regenerated seeds and genetic resources and develop the art of biodiversity conservation that is ensured at least 15,000 variety of rice varieties in our field. And Noyakishi retains and practices those art of seed conservation and maintains at least 2,000 variety of rice through Noyakishi seed network. And while I was doing research, I found this beautiful photograph. In the middle, you see the lady who's wearing sari. Her name is Farida Akhtar. On the back, the white salar kameez, she's Shimu Appa. And they're all traveling. At that period, they were in 80s, I think, traveling all over the Bangladesh to talk with farmers and really trying to understand how they were farming. And when I went there, I was amazed by the humbleness of the research center and how they decided that they are going to learn from farmers about farming and not teaching them with their modern knowledges how to farm. And that's what happens in especially in our part of the world. You go to universities, you read things online, or you read books and you think you know everything and you are going to teach people how to do things. But because both Farad and Farida has a Marxist orientation, they thought this whole idea of knowledge production and teaching is something very political, and they have more things to learn from the farmers rather than teaching them what to do. So slowly I started walking there, and when I first went there, this is one of the first thing I saw. It was a time when they were drying the seeds, and there were all this variety of seeds in circles, and there was this white pepper in the middle, which identify the name of the seed and its properties and other thing. And even someone like me who lives in Bangladesh and usually we eat rice as a meal 2 times a day, I don't know more than 3-4 variety of seeds that you find in supermarket. And I was wondering why I didn't know all these things exist. And what's my relationship to this land and to these seeds? And I slowly started to think. And they have a beautiful guest house. And I went upstairs and I saw this piece was framed in front of my room. On the top it says Noyakishi Andolon. In the down it says Bidishiri, which is a specific place in the border of Mymensingh in Bangladesh where the indigenous people live. And all these things you see that the farmers have draw different kind of musical tools and agricultural tools through seeds. They glued the seed and made these drawings. And I was fascinated by the approach. And each of these seed has a different name, and it comes from within that small space from different places. And I was really fascinated by that. And I was, for a long time, I was really interested in drawing. But I never went to so-called art school, so I don't know how to draw. But then I started walking around in the villages and going to different research center, and I realized there are different way of marking different things. It can be in the land itself. It doesn't have to be on the paper with pen, and that really inspired me to start producing this series of work, which is for me a light-sensitive drawing. And I started working with this different variety of seeds and produced these prints in darkroom. But what really amazed me that each of these seeds has a different name. And I started to think who gave these names and where these names comes from. And I will read few names just to share with you. Tulshimala, Tulidigha, Shimuli, Locha, Ponkhoraj, Dulailai, Hoshumkini, Kumari, Shurjumukhi, Malbhog, Saheb Giza, Sonaka, Bata, Kaminishali, Dhapa, Bhojon, সোনাজলি, পাটনল, দুধকলম, চোনমতি, লক্ষ্মীদীঘা, কোমলভোগ, বরণ, সরসরি, লেটপাশা, জলডুবি, খমন, ফুলবাদাম, তুফান, ইন্দ্রশালী, মুক্তারা, গাজীভোগ, বরণ, শামুকাটা, গিলামেথি, হিজলদীঘা. And there are many more. It's endless. And all these names are so poetic, and it refers to so many things which are so particular to the land and to the people and to the culture. And just to give you a few examples, on the top it says Kala Manik. Kala in Bengali means black, and Manik means something very close to you, something very precious, almost like a black jewel. And Boteshwar is a name of a place called Wari Boteshwar, which is an archaeological site which was just found, which is dated 450 BC. So all these names has a very interesting connection to the place. And on the contrast, these are the seed now we plant through the Rice Institute, which has numbers TY102, C1 SGC6, BRRI 71. And I started to think, like, what is the relationship between these numbers and names? Why the farmers are giving names and why the researchers are giving numbers? What is the relationship between the history, the knowledge production, the culture, and this numeric way of looking at life? Because seed is a living being. And I realized while researching, I asked farmers curiously, why actually we need these seeds? We just need 3 seeds which can be produced in numbers and sell and earn money and have a good life, no? And they gave me very interesting answers. So first they asked me, why don't you open your shoe and come to the land, put your feet in the mud and spend some days with us. And I think that was one of the most sharpest critique I ever got in my life, because I have researched, I have this many questions, and I wanted to ask these questions to the farmers and understand what does this farming process means. And they completely refused me to give answers, and they told me, come and experience how we live, and you will get your answers. And I think that was something very philosophical, and that changed the way I have worked with them over the years. And I realized that talking with farmers, all these seeds has a reason to exist, both from a functional and ecological perspective. Some of these seeds are very effective in flood-prone area, because Bangladesh is a land which is around rivers and sea. And some of them very useful when the salinity level is very high, which is now happening because of climate change and industrial shrimp farming in the southern part of Bangladesh. But some of them are also cooked in festivals for particular kind of aroma or flavor. Some of them are cooked to produce puff rice, which we call muri, and it has a particular kind of texture. And for example, in Netrokona, where a particular kind of people live, they produce this binni dhan. And without this rice, there is no wedding ceremony in that region. So all these varieties are interlinked with some kind of cultural, social life of this region. And slowly I went to different parts of the country, and I developed this series of cyanotypes that you see. And I was also very much interested in the materiality of the seeds, the fragility of it, and how it takes form. Wherever you place them, you see it's taking a very interesting form. And some of these forms were created from the reference in nature where I have worked and what I have seen. But also we have this strong tradition of doing alpona in Bengal, in festivals or other ceremonies, and where you see people are doing these beautiful kind of geometric drawings with just simple rice powder. And all these drawings, like all these prints you see here, they were first produced in the research center where I have traveled and worked, and then I created negatives through photographs, and then they were printed in the dark room manually. And it was an intense process of printing. And I was lucky that Pathshala still had a dark room. And I printed all of my work there. But what was also interesting for me to understand that each seed is a living being, and it needs to be cultivated and preserved in certain ways. And just to give you a little example, so first the seed need to be harvested, and each time approximately, depending on where we are, there are 50 types of seeds they put to dry, and each batch will be exposed to the sun 4 times, so 4 sun. And the morning sun is better for good drying. And filling the vessels will also take a period of time like 10 days. And then all of them will be labeled and properly by name and the properties of the seeds. And this is how they preserve the seeds. And while researching, I found this photograph in the archive of Noyak Rishi, where you see a very simple photograph of a village house, a very particular kind of architecture in Bengal, made of bamboo and straw. But what else we see? Some plants growing up on the top of the house. And I started to think how we define the idea of home, how we define the place we walk, the place we live. And I realized after talking with the farmers, they believe in coexistence of other plants, soil, birds, earthworms, cow dung, flies, flowers, all energies and spirits, and all being and non-being. And the farmers' beliefs is not only about the cultivated crops that we produce for human beings to eat and for our own consumptions, but there is also a space where the uncultivated plants, fish, and animals constitute an important place in the local agricultural system and constitute a vital component to the system. A very act of collecting uncultivated biodiversity and using to prepare food or feed livestock bring farmers, particularly women and young children, into a distinct relationship with the cultivated and uncultivated space. The idea of space obtained a very different meaning here. And just to give you a small example, and it's lovely actually to talk in Kathmandu or somewhere in our part of the world where you don't have to introduce each things from zero and where you don't feel like an alien. Here you see a photograph of found spinach and leaves just in the neighborhood of Tangail where I have walked. And there's a specific tradition of eating shak in Bengali New Year. And Noyak Rishi has done a research which they call Kuriye Pawa Shak, which means the found leaves or found spinach that you found in your in neighborhood. And I will not read the names or give you more details, but just to give you a little bit of idea. So they found 63 kind of spinach, 39 were cultivated, but 24 were uncultivated. 16 of them were medicinal, which was very important for nutrition and health. 9 were cultivated, 7 were uncultivated, and 11 of them were just leaves, stems, and flowers. And 10 were unrecognizable. And why I'm saying about all this? Because I think the way people live in countries like Bangladesh is this uncultivated food or the found things are very important for the livelihood of the marginal population. Is though this whole idea of industrial production and we will buy everything and we will earn money, and through this economic transaction we will have our life is very modern and to some extent very brutal for a lot of people who lives in the countryside. And and I also wanted to show you my table. I also find it very interesting anytime there are curators coming to Bangladesh, they always want to do a studio visit. And honestly, I'm trained as a documentary photographer, and I'm trained to travel to different places. And I don't have a studio. Also, I don't afford to have a studio. So I tell them that my studios are temporary, and it shifts from place to place, and you are welcome to visit me wherever I'm walking. And it's actually very true. I think one of the beautiful spaces I had to walk is these research centers, where there is so much gems and jewels around. And every morning I used to go and just find very simple things and put them in the table, and then started to take photographs. And this idea of coexistence also pushed me to think about the second iteration of the work, where I have slowly started to look at the archive of the research center. The installation was produced in conversation with Catherine Ware, who was curating a show at that time in Centre Pompidou called Cosmopolis. And it took me 2 years to shift the work. And just to give you nature of my practice, sometimes it takes me more than 12 years to produce a work. And I always love to go back to the places and revisit, recalibrate, reread. And a lot of times when I go, there's nothing much to do, and I always try to find place where there's amazing food. So especially in this research center, because they grow everything, and the food is so lovely, you can just eat and sleep. And you will be happy when you are coming back with some kilos of weight. But I started to look at the archives and the photographs taken by farmers, researchers, activists, documents, books, handwritten notes. And I went back and started looking at the space from different vantage points. And I started producing drawings from new agriculture tools and mixing them in compositions where they can coexist together. And for me, it was important to bring this different kind of rhetoric, material, and languages, and to put them in particular kind of pairing, almost in form of collages. How the spinach were growing into each other, and some were cultivated and some were not cultivated. So also here, there are some of the photographs are not taken by me, some of the documents are not produced by me, but I put them together and created a chemistry between them to create a dialogue. And I was also interested in the materiality of the paper, printing, and space. And you can still see some of my cyanotypes, but there's also other things. Here is another photograph which really struck me. You can see this little boy holding the little cow. And there is so much intimacy and sense of love. And also it's a very interesting language. The way also the researcher or the farmer have taken the photograph, because they know the kind of relationship they have with the surroundings that they walk with. And that also pushed me to think about a form of work which is very intimate in scale and not large and humongous. I also wanted to have the work which looks fragile. So there are a lot of prints which are just stuck with little glue, which can come out any moment because of many different reasons. Let's not get there. And right now, I'm thinking about doing a show in the village, because that was the deal when I asked Farad Bhai and Farida Appa that I wanted to do the work. And they said, yes, you are very welcome, but you have to do a show for the farmers in the village. And I keep postponing it for years after years. But right now I have to do it. And the moment I think about I have to do a show for the farmers, it completely shifts my gaze, how I have looked at the work. And I'm trying to collaborate with the architect and see how we can develop a show in a village with such a material which will work with the wind and the dust and the kind of ecological parameter that exists in this research center. Yeah. But there is also other reality which really pushed me to think the way I have worked. Seed's dual journey from celebration to the colonial oppression became a testimony in Bijon Bhattacharya's famous play Navanno. The wound of seeds in Bengal stems from colonizations. In 1944's famine under the British regime resulted countless deaths, and the food grains were hoarded by the rulers. Rice was gold in Bengal, and it gradually became lethal political weapon for international powers. This is one of the famous drawing by Jainul Abidin, who is one of the leading artists in Bangladesh, who founded the art college, Charukala. And he was at that time studying in Kolkata. And the reason why I was interested, and you see also a photograph of Sunil Jana, and basically Jainul, Sunil, and Chitta Prasad used to walk in the streets of Calcutta and do this drawing, mostly for the communist paper. But the reason why I was interested in these shades of blue goes back to the 19th century Bengal, where the native farmers were forced to produce indigo in these rice fields. And the indigo fed the British cotton textile industry, whose tremendous growth had been spurred by the Industrial Revolution, leading the British East India Company to pursue an exploitative system of indigo cultivation in Bengal. The demand for blue dyes in Europe had made indigo plantation commercially profitable. The farmers in Bengal were forced to produce indigo alongside rice fields. The planters provided dadon, loan in Bengali, at very high interest. Once an indebted farmer remained obligated with his entire life before passing the loan to successors. In Seed Shall Set Us Free, indigo held a particular place. The bright blue hues of the cyanotypes touch upon the sinister place that these cash crops hold in Bengali history. But on the other hand, right now, Bangladesh Rights Research Institute is trying to introduce genetically engineered golden rice developed by Syngenta, a biotech industry, to produce pro-vitamin A. But this vitamin A deficiency is not caused by the lack of vitamin A in food, but people's inability to achieve a balanced diet. And farmers in Bangladesh are still protesting in different places against all these hybrid seed and pesticides in food. And Noya Krishi plays a big role there. This is in front of our National Museum, which is a very interesting place. This is the very place where we stand also for Shoidul at 100 days when he was in jail. And this is the place in generally where most of the people go with a placard and stand and protest. And this is 1998, 17 October. And this is still going on. And right now I'm researching on the history of Indigo Revolt. That will be the next chapter of the work. And that's it from my end. I don't want to make it too long, but I want to thank everyone in the Photo Circle team, especially Srishti, I don't know if she's here, who helped me to install every inch of the show. Jai Singh, who carried my work from Bombay, and to Nishant, Buno, Prasid, Sagar, Shikhar, Kabir, Jivel, and all these wonderful people who have worked day and night to make this festival happen. Thank you very much.
I have a question I'll start with. You said you were like putting off showing it to the farmers. I mean, other than sort of these aspects of materiality, I know we've been talking about tape that sticks, tape that doesn't stick, tape that sticks in France versus in Nepal. What are some other sort of considerations, like you were saying, you're thinking differently about taking this work, let's say, back to the community. What have you been thinking about?
I mean, I have to produce a new bodies of work because this will not make sense at all there. And also this is about them, no? So I've been thinking for quite some time about how to really engage them in a way which is not about really exhibition making, but more about having conversation and having a certain form of dialogue with each other, and also to be in a place where celebration and festivity plays a huge role. And for them, the most interesting part of celebrity is a mela. That's why Shohidul has named Chobi Mela, which has nothing to do with a fair, but it's also about getting together and sharing all about your resources. And also there is so much untapped knowledge that they even don't recognize them also about knowledge, A lot of them writes, a lot of them sings, a lot of them speaks, and a lot of them just do things. Rather than me showing them about what they do, maybe I just create a space where they all can come together and have a different sense of dialogue. And anyway, Noya Krishi and Obinik, they're doing it for the last 30 years. And I can just add a very little bit. But I was also thinking about to bring a lot of people like me who have grown up in cities, how we can really engage with this sort of knowledge. That's we are going far and far and far away, There are more McDonald's and Pizza Huts in Dhaka than where you can go and buy rice, maybe, a different form of ecology, different way of understanding. Yeah. So I really don't know. And I think the moment I think about it, it also tells me that how my practice was so much focused on urban spaces and quote unquote in this modern societies. And of course, you can just print your works in Flex and travel it to wherever you want. But for me, that doesn't really, that's not intervention. And basically people like me have to learn more things from them rather than me telling them what is it about.
Thank you for that, Wasif. Now, Farhad Mazhar and Farid Akhtar are very interesting people, very controversial in their own ways, and have played a very important role in not only the farming industry, but also in their resistance to, fertilizer companies and corporate interests and a whole range of things. How do they see the work that you've produced?
I don't know. I don't think they take me seriously. I think one of the good qualities they have, and also you have, and the people your generation have, is to know how to hang out with young people and let them do what they want to do. And and not take them too seriously. And they will grow in their own way. But that's I told initially, their deal was, I have to do a show for the farmers. And I told them I want to do a show which can be a permanent show in their space, so which can stay. So it's not a one-off thing, because a lot of people, a lot of researchers, students go there to visit. And I'm thinking about a form of a work which can stay there maybe for 10 years, and we can go back and have different dialogues.
Thank you very much for your talk and for sharing your work. It's beautiful to see, and I was really struck with the temporality in your work and how it emerges over time and how it engages with time. And I was just thinking about the role of the archive. You use archives, you research in archives, but in your work, I guess, you also produce an archive. You produce an archive of images of the seeds, and And the bringing together of these images and how you select certain things is also a kind of archive, but an alternative archive. It's not the archive that has a kind of official roof. So I just wondered if you could say something about this, how you see your work in relation to this idea of the archive, of preservation, of connecting the past and the future, essentially.
Yeah. I actually went there after producing the first series of work. I asked them if they have an archive. And they looked at me curiously and they said to me, "What do you mean by archive?" I said, an archive where you store things. And they told me, "What do you mean by storing things?" And I got really puzzled. And then I said, old documents and old photographs. And then they laughed at me. They said, "Oh, yes, they are there. Look at these photo albums, which are all, pasted with laminations and with other things. And they have this huge amount of documentations." But that also really triggered me, how we started thinking about archive. What becomes archive and who decides that this will be an archive and why there is a necessity of an archive. And I think it also has a relationship with our colonial past, and how certain things, like when I first went to the British Museum, I was literally shocked. I couldn't imagine that people can really take a whole column and shift it to somewhere else and put it in a museum. I will say I was really interested to see how they are looking at themselves, what is their gaze, how they were engaging. And obviously there was no professional people maintaining neither the archive and nor they have produced the work. And this position of thinking the whole research and whole practice as a living entity was profound for me, because it's something they do every day. And for them, the most important work is the text they are producing, because Farhad and Farida both are writers, and the seed network they have all around the country, that's the main archive for them, where the farmers can come and take the seeds for fee, and they don't have to pay, and there is no patent on the seeds. Nobody is saying this is my seed, I own it. And this process of creating a network which is collective and which is shareable, I think that was the most important thing for me. Sorry, I didn't directly answer your question, but I also really didn't look at as archive. All of the material you see are scanned. And I didn't want to also take anything original from there. And I think there was a profound beauty how they were running the whole institution. Not making any buildings. They were using this matir kolshi, which is we call vessels. I don't know what is the exact English, because there is a certain kind of temperature that can hold. Yeah. Oh, God.
Thanks, Wasif. It was nice to actually hear about the work that we've been seeing online and snippets of it, and also see the iterative nature of how the archive comes into the work. For me, the most interesting was actually seeing that the seed drawing outside the room and how the cyanotypes kind of emerged from that thinking. I was really struck by that contrast that you showed with the language that the researchers use and the language that the farmers use. And, we're in this space where we are learning to pay more attention to communities and indigenous communities and farmers that have lived and breathed this practice, and to learn from them. But there are also, say, researchers and communities that are working towards seed preservation. So because you're outside the farming community, you're sort of this outsider going in trying to know, did you ever think of sort of showing that other language? And is there a conflict? Do they ever come together? Because it feels like they're very different worlds, but are they working for the same Do they have the same intent and cause, and can those languages kind of sit side by side? I was really struck by the contrast of the language. And did you kind of explore that more?
I'm sure there are a lot of scientists and researchers who work beyond these standard parameters. I didn't talk with any of them directly. I wanted to talk a lot of with these experts, and every time I went to fora, they refused. I asked him to give me books to read. He refused. He said, "Why you need books? Why don't you go there and spend times?" And of course, there are huge contradictions and there are huge conflicts, but also there are a lot of overlaps. I really didn't talk with specifically to any scientist. Or any people who works for the Rice Institute or who works for Monsanto, Syngenta, or any of these big corporations. Yeah.
I was just sort of wondering about how, when you showed us the documentation from the Institute, and also you talked about how the seeds themselves are so fragile, right? And there was a point that came up about how the documentation itself is not an archive. So one wonders about, say, longevity of these documents and how much this knowledge may or may not be preserved, and ideas around that preservation itself. So I was wondering, in the production of the cyanotypes, if you saw some sort of affinity between this fragility or the ephemeral nature of both of these forms.
I mean, yes, in some ways. One of the reasons I was interested in this analog process, because you loses your control. You know, every print you can't really control, and the amount of dust we have in our part of the world is very difficult to produce any kind of clean print. But I think that was also a learning for me to let things go and see how things can emerge. And to be honest, cyanotypes is the most cheapest production, is the most easiest analog production in 19th century. It becomes precious because we don't have the patience and the chemicals and the techniques and the dark rooms anymore. But it's nothing actually very special. And for me, it was also important because cyanotypes are used to call blueprints in architectural drawings, which works as a reference for a master drawing, which can be you can make multiple reproductions for future. So for me, it was also a conceptual gesture. Yeah.